Remember to keep in touch with us because
we are here for you. Love your teachers.
A message from the CIFEC, Clifton Hunter, Creek and Spot Bay, Georgetown, Prospect, Savannah, and Sir John A. Cumber Schools, and Little Cayman Education Services.
Burger King has been your family restaurant for many years. Bringing you delicious food in a safe environment has always been our #1 priority. And until further notice, you'll only be able to visit us via drive-thru.
Get your motor running. Oh, and out past Red Bay. Looking for a BK. At whatever time of day. Burger King drive-thru.
Burger King's drive-thru is open at 7 Mile Beach, Waterfront Georgetown, Walkers Road, or Red Bay for breakfast, lunch, or dinner.
It's hump day. Roll back. Roll back. Every Wednesday and Thursday, all Rubus stations are rolling back the price on all fuel purchases by 20 cents. Every customer will save 20 cents on every gallon of fuel purchased on Wednesday and Thursday. Every customer. Only at Rubus. Roll back. Roll back.
Imagine you had a bag of candy and someone told you that one piece was poisoned. Now, would you risk eating any of them? More importantly, would you ever give those to your kids? Probably not. You would even make sure that nobody else could get them either. That poison candy is much like COVID-19. Don't risk being poisoned. Stay home. Tell others to do the same. Protect yourself and your loved ones. Hashtag Stay Home Cayman.
Live from Star 927 Studios in the center of Cayman's capital city, Georgetown. This is Straight Talk with Ruth Anna.
Good evening, everybody. You are tuned into Straight Talk, brought to you exclusively by Star 92.7 Premium Radio. I am your host, Ruth Anna Young, always honored to be your host here on Straight Talk every Monday through Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. right here and nowhere else other than Star 92.7. It is 5:05 on the Star 92.7 clock, and it is the 26th of May. And dare I say, based on the latest announcement that came out, we are officially 1 year away from our next general election, 26th of May 2021. So I feel like we can officially start the countdown clock. So I just had to remind you of that if you've missed the announcements. Otherwise, the governor's office did announce recently that the election day for 2021 is officially set for May 26, 2021, where 19 seats will be contested in our 19 single-member constituencies. So we are certainly counting down to that here on Straight Talk. And for any of you who remember, that is when I was what I call inducted by fire. I became the host of Straight Talk in March of 2017, just days prior to nomination day of our last general election. So this is a full circle moment for me leading up to this next election. And so lots of interesting conversation that we will have. But today I will be joined by my guest this afternoon from Hazard Management, Cayman Islands. I will have Mr. Simon Boxall, who will be with me. He has been with me before, so we don't get who your mama is from Mr. Simon. But Mr. Lennox Vernon, who is a newbie to the Straight Talk studio, will be also joining us via the virtual studio. So we do have a upcoming Who Your Mama Is segment from Mr. Lennox, a West Bear himself, but I'll let him tell the tale. And 943-3700 is the line in studio. You can also WhatsApp me at 324-1565, or you can email me at straighttalkci@gmail.com. But you guys know the deal. Before we go any further into our conversation here on Straight Talk, we always start our time together with the reading of today's Daily Bread. So today's Daily Bread is entitled Sweeter Than Honey, and the scripture is Proverbs 16 verse 24, and reads, "Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones." His topic was racial tension, yet the speaker remained calm and collected. Standing on stage before a large audience, he spoke boldly, but with grace, humility, kindness, and even humor. Soon the tense audience visibly relaxed, laughing along with the speaker about the dilemma they all faced. how to resolve their hot issue but cool down their feelings and words. Yes, how to tackle a sour topic with sweet grace. King Solomon advised the same approach for all of us. Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. In this way, the hearts of the wise make their lips promote instruction. Why would a powerful king like Solomon devote time to addressing how we speak? Because words can destroy. During Solomon's time, kings relied on messengers for information about their nations, and calm and reliable messengers were highly valued. They used prudent words and reasoned tongues, not overreacting or speaking harshly, no matter the issue. We all can benefit by gracing our opinions and thoughts with godly and prudent sweetness. In Solomon's words, to humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue. Thanks be to God for that word today. As always, here on Straight Talk, we remind you, we encourage you to spend time each and every day focused on His word, meditating on His grace and how awesome He is, whether that be in the morning or the evening or right here with me, Monday through Thursday on Straight Talk. Shout out to all of you who are already locked in via the Star 92.7 Facebook page and live on our video stream. Thank you all for tuning in. And those of you on the radio, thank you for tuning in. We have a full hour with Hazard Management Cayman Islands. I have joining me this afternoon in the virtual studio, Mr. Simon Boxall and Mr. Lennox Vernon from Hazard Management Cayman Islands. And as I mentioned, Mr. Simon is no newbie to the Straight Talk studio. How are you doing, Mr. Simon? Hello, hello.
Doing okay. Really glad to be here. Thank you for having us on, Rutana. That was lovely reading too.
Thank you. My pleasure to have you back. And Mr. Lennox, welcome for the very first time. How are you doing?
I am doing awesome. Thank you very much. But as you may have heard from other civil servants, it's work, work, work.
Absolutely. But before we get to talk about the work that you guys have been doing since in fine Straight Talk style and Straight Talk custom, Mr. Lennox, everybody is dying to know who your mama is.
Well, as I'm a newbie, I will first say my mama is actually Ellen Vernon. And we're from West Bay. My father is Leslie Vernon. And I'm a West Bayer, true to the bone or through the heart. Love it, don't want to leave, and come from a large family, actually stemming from the Kelly's family branch. And just love my personal life, my family, and everyone else is very, very well close knitted. From a work point of view, majority of my life has been spent at 911 emergency communications. So I have done public safety communications for 20 years, 2 decades, a little over. And now I'm joining the hazard management team to learn about disaster management. So, of course, I'm taking tutelage from Simon and all the other experts here. And my main focus here has been logistics, communications, as well as shelter management and such.
Awesome. And so I thank you for sharing that. And certainly the Kelly clan is a large one because, of course, like you, I am a West Bayer through and through.
That's right.
The reality is right now I live beyond the boundary. I call the fire station the boundary, right?
Right.
But certainly I'm crossing my fingers for the day I get to make my way back. And a special shout out to Mousy herself all the way from the UK. Thank you for continuing to tune in. She's sending love. She's a big up on the Facebook stream. So thank you for tuning in, Mousy. I see also that we are joined as well. Dwayne Ebanks tuned in. Thank you so much. I know Noelle Williams, my mom, Clinton Ebanks. Thank you guys for locking it in on via Facebook this afternoon. But Mr. Simon, I know it's been a while since you've been on, but while I won't ask you to share who your mama is again, because I think you've been inducted into the Straight Talk Hall of Fame, but I would like you to, for anyone, not everyone is quite familiar with what you do and kind of your background. So if you could just share briefly with everyone, kind of your role within the hazard management team so that they can be better familiarized with what you do.
Well, thank you, Ruthana. It's actually coming through a bit crackly, your audio, so I'm hoping mine's okay. Wave at me if
hear
it's
you
not. So
clear,
I do a lot of
crystal
the...
clear.
Okay, great. Thank you again. So my role is more the awareness and the communication side of things. So looking at the present situation, I sit on what's known as the Joint Communications Service, which is a whole group now of government communication communicators who are talking kind of in unison to try to communicate clearly about the current crisis that we're in with the activation for COVID-19. So I manage the social media for hazard management, and I'm involved in notifying the public if there's a threat coming, or if there's something that they should know that might threaten their safety or their property. And I do presentations in schools. And if anybody out there wants me to come and do a presentation, I'm going to start to try to do them online more frequently. I recently did one for Health City for 125 of their staff. I did that last week. So, and looking at kind of issues like plan development, oil spills, but not obviously at this particular juncture where we're very focused on COVID. But now we're trying to anticipate hurricane season, so involved kind of with that aspect too.
Absolutely. And I know that hazard management, the entire team, if you take a snapshot of the last 5 or 6 months, your hands have been very full, right? If we really, I can only imagine, based on all of the things that have unfolded over the first half of 2020, from earthquakes to fires, and then certainly this global pandemic, and now also in the midst of a pandemic, leading into the hurricane season. So I can't imagine, I personally can't imagine what you guys must have been juggling over the last few months. But I would like to, although we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly lots of questions about how we manage an upcoming hurricane season with the added extras of the COVID-19 pandemic, and even, the thoughts that I'm, trying to sift through as a mom and all those sorts of things, and dealing with the hurricane season. I want to rewind a little bit, if you would let me, right? So we started off the year with a earthquake, and then we rolled into a major fire at the Georgetown dump. If you could, since we really haven't had the opportunity to catch up here on Straight Talk with hazard management, if we could just rewind a little bit and talk about what that has been like for you guys. And Lennox, when did you get seconded over to hazard management? How long have you been with them?
I've been seconded since July 2018, and then I joined the team last year.
Okay, and
full time.
Okay, so you started full time last year, and so you've been a part of all of these events over the last few months. What was it like managing what in my lifetime, what I know to be the most significant earthquake that we have had, and all of the fallout of that? What was that period like for you guys?
Well, if I can share with you a personal experience related to the earthquake itself.
Please.
Myself, along with a couple other members of staff and personnel within the building, was actually meeting with the director at the time of the earthquake. And I gotta give my kudos to Simon, because he was shouting out instructions during that whole ordeal and telling us, to shelter in place, get under a piece of furniture, and hold on, and so on. So that was where and how it started. Following that, again, it has been quite a challenge for me, particularly coming from, again, 2 decades of public safety, and what I dealt with mostly was emergencies. I worked the operational side, and then I got into the management side. But coming to HMCI, we're dealing with disasters. And in my opinion, there's a fine line between where an emergency sort of stops and you take it on as a disaster. And separating that fine line has been a bit challenging for me. But to my advantage, I would say, we have the director, Miss Danielle Coleman, who has, shared a plethora of knowledge. Simon, Teresita, Liana, the whole entire team. Can't leave out Mark. We call him Mitigation Mark. And we are a very small team, but we share a lot of information, and it allows us to get through the days much, much easier. But again, it comes back to when a situation faces us, or when we're confronted by one, it's rather challenging, to say the least, to manage it, because we are such a small team and the response is so massive, which is why we have to adopt things such as the National Emergency Notification System to notify the public, which is the radio interrupt, among other things. We're looking at cell broadcasts. There's so many things that we're trying to do to say, hey, when we have a situation, whether it's natural or man-made, face us, how we inform, warn, educate the public. So as Simon said before, he plays an integral role in terms of going out throughout the year, educating the public on how to manage, how to prepare, how to mitigate against various types of disasters that might face us.
And what and thank you for sharing your own individual experience and how that like feeds into then your position that then has to trip in, right, going from being a human in the midst of an emergency, a disaster, and then having to both the whole team having to then shift into your role as hazard management at Cayman Islands, right? And what after the hurricane, I mean, the hurricane is on my mind. After the earthquake, what did that period look like for your team? Even just a snippet of what that looked like for you.
For us, I would start by saying I think the landfill fire was almost like a prelude, almost like a practice to prepare us for the earthquake. As we observed it, it started to unfold and evolved into a larger event as we received updates and so on from the fire service. So that being said, once we started to experience the earthquake, the old adage 0 to 100, well, it went from 0 to 100 or even 1,000 very, very quickly. We went from a very small space to a cramped environment where people were looking for information, what to do. A number of the people who experienced this has never experienced it before in their lives, including us, and they were looking for answers. But the team rallied together quite well. The director was very quick on her feet in terms of activating certain processes and so on. And I should also note that the deputy governor and a number of MLAs actually came by to check on us, as well as offered their assistance to help us get past this or manage it. So it has been a very, in my opinion, a very pleasurable experience, despite the challenges that it brought. It's one thing to experience a disaster that you've been preparing for a long time and not have the resources available to you. Well, on that day, I mean, we had every single resource at our fingertips. It was just a matter of identifying it and saying to those persons, we need this. And there was no question as to how quickly they moved on that, including the governor himself. I was so surprised at how involved the governor was. and I really appreciated it.
And I know that it definitely, I think, to be honest, from a public standpoint, from the once comms were back up, because I know that at least for a number of us, phone service was down for a small bit, but once comms were back up, I felt as though hazard management and the leadership and the team in that capacity was doing everything that they could do to disseminate information, which I think is what people are looking to. And we have Mr. Simon back with us. Mr. Simon?
Yes, it's clear now. I can hear you guys clearly.
Okay, perfect.
And you were asking earlier kind of what it's been like over the last few months, because late January.
Yeah, recapping specifically just the earthquake period. And so I'm interested to hear from you, because Lennox did say, you were the one that tripped right in, started shouting instructions to everyone in the office and all that. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was amazing to see our plans come to fruition, because, within a few minutes, less than 10 minutes, we were able to get a broadcast out on the National Emergency Notification System. It was just, it's like when you see plans coming together. And I think we're seeing some of the years of planning and the work that was done by, so many people for years, like, Mr. Donovan Ebanks, Mr. McCleary Frederick, Mr. Kenny Gomez. A lot of these people laid a very good foundation. It's difficult to call names because there's so many. You have Mr. Kirkland Nixon. There's an endless stream of people that have really contributed so much to getting us in a state of kind of readiness and preparedness. And of course, once you have an impact like an earthquake, everybody would wants reassurance. They want to know that, that they have the information they need to keep themselves and their families safe. And that's totally understandable. So, we went out immediately and we were doing many presentations, but like you said, very quickly it evolved into the fire, and then we had the COVID-19. But I think, as Lennox said, the director has been, really a very steadying force and has kept us, we have a kind of a coordinating role, in addition to our training programs and our outreach, and there's this coordinating function where we bring together the national emergency mechanism, our crisis response mechanism, and that's got the National Emergency Operations Center stood up, and that happened on March 3rd with COVID-19. And then, as Lennox alluded to, just an enormous amount of people are focused on the task. You have all these different support teams specifically focused on just ensuring that we get through it as quickly and as effectively and with as least damage as possible. And they just all focus on the task. And, I think it's been very effective in some respects. We've got lots of work to do. And now coming into hurricane season, I mean, Lennox is having to deal with issues like space on the floor of shelters. How much space can we allow? We've got to make it a welcoming environment for people. People don't have much money. Many people are, they don't have a lot of money for bringing their canned food or masks to the shelter. So we have to make sure we have certain supplies in place and that people know that it's a safe refuge, because at the end of the day, the storm surge is what is the number one threat to everybody. And so that is what we're really concerned about, that people won't find a safe place to go to shelter, and whether that's asking a family member or, and with the issues with the regulations and curfews, it just makes everything far more complicated, and making sure you have enough PPE supplies. And Lennox is dealing with a lot of these issues. We have shelter training tomorrow. By the way, a huge shout out to Teresita Da Silva, acting deputy director, whose birthday it is today. And she's been doing an incredible job. Yes.
Exciting. And I want to make sure, I would be remiss if I didn't touch on this comment immediately that came in via Facebook, and I hope I don't make Lennox blush, right? So comments are coming in via Facebook, and I will ask those who commented before to forgive me. I will get to them, but and I hope I do not say her name incorrectly. Vianney Vernon, it says, "Well done, HM, and especially to my king Lennox." So she is sending love on Facebook. Yeah, I had to, Lennox. I had to put that in there. I saw it come in, and I've been like itching to throw that in there. I have others that I will get to as well. Mr. Quincy Brown, as I mentioned earlier, he says, "Good afternoon, Ruthana. We are exactly 1 year away from Cayman Islands general election today, Wednesday, the 26th of May, 2021." And Amjad says, "Hi, Cayman. Please notice it is time for us to call that life and go back to normal because people can't stay in this situation so long." And he, of course, is referring to the COVID-19 situation. I know we are continuing to open up, but I will, Mr. Simon, briefly before we go, we have. Actually, we're about to go to our first break. And when I come back, I have questions I would like to ask in regards to, as you mentioned, you guys are looking at how you manage the upcoming hurricane season amidst all of the new things to consider in relation to, like you say, PPE and new needs that may arise during a time like this. If it is found, if people do need to go into shelters and decreased disposable income for many and those sorts of things. And I know that for me, I now am in a different thought process than I was last year, because I remember, and I'll just say this and go out to our first break, but I remember last year when we were doing our usual, conversations with Red Cross and other members of hazard management talking about the upcoming hurricane season. And I asked, I think, Carolina Ferreira at that time, having an infant in the house, what was the recommendation for families with infants in relation to that? And her honest opinion was, if you can go, then go, right? As in leave the island, because the lower the amount of vulnerable people the shelters have to deal with, the better. Now I look at that, my daughter is still under 2. And so you're kind of like, would I be actually able to leave? So my planning is different this time around. So I have tons of questions for you as soon as we come back from the next break. I know you may or may not have answers to them already, but we are going out to our first break of our time together. And for those who are just coming in, whether it be radio or the Facebook stream, I am joined until 6 o'clock by Mr. Simon and Lennox of Hazard Management Cayman Islands. And they'll be with me talking about not only the past few months of, over the beginning of 2020 and all that they've managed, but also how they are now preparing for the upcoming hurricane season in the midst of all that must be considered for this global pandemic. But we'll be with you until 6 o'clock. We'll be gone for about 2 minutes during this break. So keep it locked for some more Straight Talk on Star 92.7.
Join the conversation. The phone lines are now open. 943-3700. You can also find us on Facebook or email us at straighttalkci@gmail.com.
Don't let the actions of the few continue to impact the majority. If you know of someone who is taking unnecessary risks with social distancing and curfews, talk to them. Remind your siblings, children, parents, and friends of the importance of social distancing. We will all get through these challenging times, but only if we can all work together. #StayHomeCayman.
Dear parents and guardians, we deeply care about our students and understand the challenges you may now face during these unprecedented times.
We want you to know that we are committed to ensuring that your child's education continues.
And that you are not alone. We are doing everything we can to make sure no child is left behind.
But to do so, we need your help to get connected and stay connected with you and your child. So reach out to us and speak with us
about how we can best support you and your needs. Working hand in hand with you is the only way to secure our children's future.
We are in this together.
A message from the Creek and Spot Bay, East End, Prospect, Red Bay, and Sir John A. Cumber schools.
In this time of crisis, we are right here to help keep the power on.
We are here to serve you. We are committed to ensuring that you have electricity. Without electricity, not many things will work.
We are right here to help keep the power turned on.
We are CUC. You can count on us.
Welcome back to Straight Talk with Ruth Anna on Star 927.
We are back, folks, and you are tuned into Straight Talk, brought to you exclusively by Star 92.7 Premium Radio. I am your host, Ruth Anna Young, with you until 6 o'clock this evening, joined in studio this afternoon by representatives from the team at Hazard Management, Mr. Simon Boxall, who is certainly no stranger to the Straight Talk studio, and Mr. Lennox, who is joining us for the first time, but hopefully not the last. Welcome back to the virtual studio, gentlemen. We were gone for a brief break, but let's get right to it because, as you notice, time winds away with us very, very quickly. So now I want to spend a little bit of time because I know the questions are starting to arise, right? Hurricane season is coming, but we are still what seems to be still quite in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, while we are bit by bit opening up as a country. Still, masks and social distancing are our new norm, along with many other things. And of course, Lennox, am I pronouncing the name correctly? Vianney, is that how you say her name?
Yes, Vianney.
Okay, Vianney, and I just want you to know that she must have heard my comments, because she put another comments with her laughing face and her clapping hands in the Facebook feed, right? And so I find it equally as amusing and adorable as she does. But the hurricane season is coming, and as Mr. Simon mentioned, you as a team, and in particular, it seems, Lennox, you are spending quite a bit of your time on this in terms of mapping out what we do now as it pertains to hurricane shelters and hurricane preparedness. I first want to ask, how does all of the new considerations with the COVID-19 pandemic change? How many change? Like, is it a dramatically different environment and planning for you guys with those considerations preparing for the hurricane season?
I could jump in quickly and then let Lennox move through this one, but I think the activation of the NEOC in some respects has given us an opportunity to work together on a daily basis. And so the systems and the processes at the moment are actually quite efficient and quite effective. Obviously, the threat remains. If we do get impacted by a hurricane during COVID, it's incredibly complicated. So we are trying to plan and prepare for it as best we can, but it's very complicated. And I'll let Lennox talk about some of those complications now, maybe.
Okay. And how does it change things for you, Lennox? Like, how has COVID-19 changed the planning for the upcoming hurricane season?
Well, considering that I am relatively new myself to the sheltering area, it from last year when I was just an observer, comparing to this year as I'm leading, that in itself is a huge difference. But in terms of planning, where it's difficult to rely on a lot of the information from previous years. You can't just simply, people say, let's not reinvent the wheel, let's just take on or adopt what we used previously. Well, for the most part, we can do that. However, there's significant considerations that we must bear in mind. For example, COVID is here and quite present, and we are still getting numbers at this stage. So we have to consider PPE, personal protective equipment, and we have to consider, again, the impact of COVID-19. Some people are out of work. So as Simon mentioned earlier, we have to increase those numbers, not just available for the one or two that show up without PPE, but to protect the whole entire shelter population. Is we have to have significantly more numbers on hand. So that is a significant consideration. The one thing that has presented a number of challenges, or a bit of challenge for us, is the numbers. Most of our shelter population numbers have been publicized. So now there's a lot of conversations regarding, well, what are those new numbers look like? How much do they reduce by? Because there has to be a reduction. As it stands, we're somewhere around 50% reduction, but I don't want you to hang on to that because we are in consultation with the health service industry because the pandemic is really, we have to seek guidance from the health side.
Yeah.
So in my estimation, just looking at it, when we're considering social distancing, a minimum of 6 feet, we're looking at about a 50% reduction based upon that alone. Again, we will speak with the health service industry and confirm whether it's hard and fast that we have to go with those numbers, and then we can publicize what the reduction would be. But without any expertise of my own, there has to be a reduction.
Right. And to facilitate for, because you don't want to be taking care of one problem and then feed another problem, an outbreak of COVID in the midst of, post-hurricane
Absolutely.
sheltering, right?
No,
so that's essentially what you're trying to prevent.
Absolutely.
And we get
Before
elderly and vulnerable.
I should say we have to consider, as Simon just mentioned, the vulnerable, the elderly community, and so on. But we are moving into a phase where we're identifying new shelters because we're already low in terms of the capacity levels. If we're cutting it by 50%, we are moving into a phase of identifying new shelters that we could perhaps add to the list, perhaps only for the 2020 season, considering we're going through the COVID pandemic at the moment. But again, it's a necessary evil that we have to address.
Right. And so which is comforting for the public, I think, to know that is a matter of consideration, right? That you guys are looking at, additional, I guess, for this season, facilities to house people, because I think it is very concerning for many of us. And I mentioned prior to the break, I know my considerations are completely different this year, right? Because now I have no idea what the government may opt to do in terms of flights and stuff, if there was enough of a threat. But many of the people who live in Cayman, a little bit less now, I would say in recent years, but many people still opt to get on a flight and head off to somewhere not threatened by a hurricane, as opposed to riding it out here, right? If they can afford to do it, they have the family abroad or whatever, they can choose to say, if the hurricane's coming, lock up the house, head out of here, right? We don't know that would be possible in during this hurricane season, or especially in the earlier part of it, if we are threatened by a hurricane in the earlier parts of the season prior to the reopening of the hotels. And there are a lot of moving pieces, and so this is where a lot of questions are starting to arise, I believe, and many of us are having to plan differently, because, as I mentioned last year, and the advice generally from the Red Cross and others is, if you have infants or other particularly vulnerable people, sometimes the best option is to just leave, rather than hazard management and emergency personnel having to try to manage particularly vulnerable groups of people, also within the shelters, right? But for those of us who now have to look at, okay, in the event that is not possible, or not the best decision during this hurricane season, we also have to plan differently, right? And so I know many people are asking those questions. Has there been any, and this may be, something I may have to ask at a later time, but have those discussions arisen as yet, in terms of, let's say we know that right now the ports are scheduled to be closed until 1st of September, right? At least until that time. Has there been discussions about whether or not there would be flights that would become available for the purpose of people just leaving because of a threat of a hurricane?
Well, obviously, we have one of our support teams in the NAOC is, in fact, the evacuation emergency support team, and it's made up of about I'd say about 25 people. So that gives you a bit of a sense of how big the NEOC is, that there's just one particular function area of the NEOC, and that's got all the like people from Cayman Airways on it, the managers, the Civil Aviation Authority, people like Andrew McLaughlin and Mr. Albert Anderson, you know, and Mr. Worms and people from Cayman Airways. Plus, you've got all the consular representatives for, you know, all the different countries that have a representative here, like the Philippines and so on. So it's actually a fairly big group, but in the beginning, it's been managed fairly heavily by the governor's office because, you know, for fairly obvious reasons, because of COVID, it's really resulted in a huge lockdown of borders and airports and so on and so forth. So it becomes almost like, you know, it's sort of no longer being dealt with by the aviation industry. Quite often it's a decision at the executive level whether you allow flights in and things like that. So you've seen it's been difficult to get flights to Jamaica or impossible to date. But evacuation is one of the hugest concerns because it's we're a low-lying set of islands, and we know that we're very coastal. You know, we remain vulnerable to the rise of in a surge and also the big battering waves. So people need to, like you say, I had a one-year-old daughter too when Hurricane Ivan hit. I managed to get her off 3 days before, and I was so grateful for that because, like you said, it's very difficult. But now we've got to plan a whole, you know, in a whole different way. And even our supply kit, if we can afford it, like you say, because a lot of us can't now. We're really, a lot of people are struggling. So putting together like canned food and non-perishable and even some masks and maybe some wipes and some sanitizers and nappies. And yeah, it's tough. It's tough. So our support level has to increase and acknowledge that. And I think government's doing, you know, a really pretty good job in that. And it's, you know, money for all governments is difficult right now, and they've got to be careful with money. But I think, you know, they've tried, and it continues, you know. And some people always say more is necessary, but and there's a lot of need. But yeah, so planning for something like, you know, a hurricane on top of what we're dealing with, it's stressful for people. We don't want people to get overly alarmed. Normally the season doesn't really get going until like the middle of the season, like in fact Cayman, because we're in the Western Caribbean, the latter part of the season, our particular area becomes the warmest area. It's a spawning ground for hurricanes in like October, November. So our peak months is actually October.
Okay.
So there is time for us to plan. There's time, hopefully, to get a vaccine or get through the COVID-19. But at the same time, we can't take our eye off the ball because it's the primary threat, really, at the end of the day. I mean, you have to try to do whatever you can to save lives. And that may even mean making difficult decisions regarding COVID-19. And, you know, when you're weighing up the two threats, drowning is a more serious option for people. So, you know, we have to really think it through carefully, and evacuation, the lack of mobility for people with flights, and it's impacting the financial services sector. They want to know that their operations can continue. If they can't get their staff off the island, they may not be able to set up in a remote location and keep the operation going. So they're concerned, how do they get their people back?
Yes.
So it's not just as an individual or as a family. There's considerations. And fortunately, we've got incredibly smart people in people like the National Hazard Management Policy Group, which is a strategic thinking arm of the NEOC, that are looking at these issues and wrestling with them. And we don't have all the answers immediately. You know, we don't have the ability to look completely into the future, but there's a lot of very smart Caymanian people and other people, teams like Governor, you know, Lennox is doing his part. Everybody is, and I think even at the individual level, the tolerance people have had for the lockdown, for the curfew, it's been difficult, it's been challenging, but together we've realized we've had to do it, and it's in our best interest. And at the end of the day, you know, you make the decisions you do, and you've got to live with them. You try the best you can. But I think the executive has done, you know, a good job, and the director of hazard management in trying to find, that middle ground and keep people safe, and still protect our economy, because clearly, people, we need money to survive too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And any, as we do, lead into with all of this, and we see predictions that, and again, like you, I don't want what I want is for us to be prepared, and not necessarily alarmed, right? Because I think that anxiousness and all that can be quite unproductive. But we are anticipating, reports indicate a possibly higher than average, hurricane season. Any I guess tips from you guys, or things that you'd like to share with the general public as to what should people be considering at this time, in addition to all of the other things that people are thinking about around COVID-19, but as it relates to what would you like from us, the public, to do as we lead into the hurricane season? What could make Lennox's job just a little bit easier, and the job of hazard management came on, just a little bit easier through this time? What would you ask of us as the public?
If I may, I think Simon will have a lot more to add to this particular topic. However, I think the key thing here is hazard management. Although we have planned for various disasters, including the pandemic and the hurricane season and so on, the key thing I would say is for families is to have a plan and consider their options. So we just spent a few minutes talking about the possibility of the evacuation not being existent. And it's not just dependent on us, it's dependent on other countries receiving these flights and so on. So have a real plan. On our website, which is caymanprepare.gov.ky, we have a plethora of information on there, including a family plan that would give you some guidance as to how you can make a plan for your family. So for example, do you plan to shelter in place at your home? Do you plan to attend a shelter? If you do, have a go bag, for example, in the event you have to run at the last moment. So the key thing or key takeaway I would say is to have a plan of action for various types of eventualities. And while you're planning for the hurricane and or COVID, you may be stricken suddenly by a fire, for example. So I would say have that plan, have that discussion, and you will likely identify gaps in things that you have at your property or your home or wherever you live. So for example, you might determine, okay, I live on the second floor and there is only one stairwell, or there's an elevator, or you come up with an alternative plan. Even if you live on the ground floor and you get trapped inside of a room and you have to escape through a window, well, once that is done, have a rendezvous point where you'd want to meet your family, pre-planned, and then have an alternate as well. So I think that is the key takeaway in my opinion.
And thank you for that, Nit. And I'll ask your comments in just a second, Simon. And what you brought to mind for me, Lennox, was I remember after the earthquake, and many of us were so completely unprepared for that. But, and I mentioned this, I think, around that time as well. So my younger sister and brother, their dad is a retired long-standing member of the Cayman Islands Fire Service, right, who now lives abroad. And so naturally, with that type of experience, the minute he got word that this is that's what had happened, he rung all of us and started to issue his orders as to what we should do, right? And basically sharing his experience. But what it made us do after that was, for the first time ever, we had discussed the idea of, or what I think they refer to it as our overseas emergency address, right? So if you were to lose contact, couldn't, whatever. Where was everyone going,
Yes.
and where were we storing this information, and, putting it on a card in diaper bags, and those sorts of things, right? Things I had never thought about until, as a family, we were then, like everybody else, shaken by this earthquake, literally and figuratively. And so, I think it definitely shed light, I think, for many of us, that these are conversations we need to have. And I did post in the Facebook feed the link to your website and the link to the family plan document that you were referring to, Lennox. So I
Yes.
posted both of them in the Facebook feed, and I think it's very useful for all, because I think for best outcomes in any disaster, it puts the onus on each of us to be as prepared as possible, right? And to be as informed as possible. And that's what I hope, in part, will come of this discussion. So turning to you, Mr. Simon, what would you like us to do? What would you like the public to do to help make the lives easier of those of you who are out there planning and responsible for managing crisis and disaster in the Cayman Islands?
Thanks, Ruthanna. I think Lennox pretty much nailed it, actually. It's hard to really get around and do things sometimes, I mean, a lot of people probably hear us speak, Lennox and I, and they will never actually get around and do it, but some people will. And I think the most important thing is, just because we're so low-lying, if you can think about your sheltering plan now, with the knowledge that probably the shelters are going to be quite busy. You've got 2 pet shelters. You're not asking somebody, and at the moment we've got these regs, so it's even difficult to try to conceptualize or think about where you might possibly go. But I think if you're in a low-lying place, it's possible the sea can come up pretty high, surprisingly high. We were all quite surprised in Ivan. So, and it can be worse than that. So think about, if you were to go somewhere that it's elevated and pretty strong, you can tell them, I'm not going to stay forever. I'm just going to stay to survive the hurricane. And the people might be scared right now because of COVID, but we've got to think about these things. And there's a possibility, we would be able to relax things to allow people to go to the such shelter, in other people's homes or office buildings or wherever. Lennox alluded to, we're trying to find more space. But at the moment, it is a challenge. There's no point beating around the bush. It's an issue. And so we're asking people, listen, if you can think of a solution, we're going to make sure those shelters are as safe as possible for you, that they've got what you need. And, we're going to honestly give it our best. And we don't have all the answers quite yet, but we are working on it. And there are smart people, really giving it a lot of thought, including, I want to shout out the Department of Children and Family Services and the number of volunteers, over, I think, 60 volunteers, brand new, that came out to volunteer to do the training. So we're lucky. We've got a whole group of people that are kind of veterans that really know what they're doing. And because of the situation we're in right now, we're probably going to try to focus as much as possible on that and serve kind of an introductory training to the other people who've just signed on now, and hopefully train them further. But these people might get quite good training with public health assisting possibly, or Department of Environmental Health. Different agencies are going to try to make sure that they're ready to do their function, that they're ready to, the reception areas are taken care of, the garbage is dealt with, that there are supplies, like Lennox said, of sanitizers and PPE, and the corridors for people to walk down, and that the bathrooms are kept clean, and so on and so forth. If people can think about, please, if you can think about another possible option that gets you up above, the possibility of a 12, 14-foot storm surge in a worst case scenario, or even something a little worse than that, think about where you could possibly go that's elevated. Just call them, tell them, I'm not going to stay there forever. I just need a place to weather the storm. And obviously a little canned food and a bit of water. And a flashlight's always useful. And a radio, so they can listen to you, Ruthanna.
Okay, got
it. A great job.
Because that is certainly one thing, is that, and it's a very relevant point, is because one thing that even with COVID-19, it's reminded me that radio is ever so relevant, right? And truth be told, I remember the day of the earthquake. It was honestly a big argument between me and my mom about whether I was coming to the radio station or not, right? And I was like, I got to go to the radio station. What are you talking about? Right? Because because I'm incredibly cognizant of the fact that the morning shows were done, right? And I'm the talk radio show in the evening, and so we say it lightly, but the dissemination of information, period, is incredibly important through those times, and that's why I don't take lightly the responsibility I have when I sit here, not just informing the public when things are fun, so to speak, but and so I certainly view that as part of my job. But we have 2 minutes left before the end of the show, so I will ask each of you to give closing thoughts, and Mr. Simon and then Lennox, before we close out the show this afternoon. We just a minute each, just closing thoughts and reminders to the public.
Yeah, just thank you so much, Ruth Anna. I think you're doing a wonderful job. Appreciate all the listeners out there. Happy birthday, Teresita. And if you can, you're going to hear hurricane season a little bit for a little while around June 1. We're not trying to scare people, but please take a little time to plan. And God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Simon. Final thoughts from you, Lennox.
Awesome. Before I forget, I just want to send a huge shout out to the DCI team, Ryan Rajkumar Singh, the director, and his 3 employees, Leith Bawden, Nicholas Washington, as well as Dwight O'Garo. They are the guys who have been driving around with the public PSA system. And I think it has been a very effective tool. I must say, if I'm not mistaken, I think Simon suggested it, but it has been very effective. And I just wanted to give my kudos to them because they've been working in the evenings, late hours, and keeping people safe.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Yes, and I've
You did all the work.
certainly seen them myself, driving around through neighborhoods, making the rounds. I think it was a great addition to how we disseminate information. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. An absolute pleasure to have you both on. Certainly, as we embark on the hurricane season, I trust that it's certainly not going to be the last I hear from Hazard Management Cayman as we go through this time. Thank you both for your time and your expertise this afternoon. And Lennox, I trust this is your first, but not your last time with us. Guys, it is 6 o'clock on the Star 92.7 clock, which means I am out of here. Back again tomorrow at 5 o'clock sharp for some more Straight Talk right here on Star 92.7. For those of you on the roadways, as we continue to roll back into some form of life as per usual, please be safe and drive home safely. I love you, and I will talk to you again tomorrow right here on Star 92.7.